God is guiding you. Let go of the past. Your new journey begins now, we have learned. And it took me many years, many tears, many mornings of wondering if the sun had forgotten to rise for me. That the past is not a chain. It is a chapter. And God, in his infinite and tender mercy, does not leave us bound to the last page we wrote. You see, I know what it is to carry yesterday like a stone around your neck, to drag the weight of old wounds, old regrets, old voices that told you who you were not. I know what it is to look in the mirror and see only the shadow of what has been done to you. But I am standing before you today as a living witness that God does not consult your past to determine your future. There is something that happens to a person when they have lived through enough pain. Something quiet, something slow. Like a vine that grows without your noticing until one morning you wake and find it has wrapped itself around every window, every door, blocking out the light. You begin to believe. Not all at once, but gradually. The way erosion works, the way silence convinces. That what has happened to you is who you are. That the sum of your losses is the definition of your life. That the story ended somewhere back there, in that room, in that relationship, in that failure, in that moment when everything you had built came apart in your hands like wet paper. I want you to know something today, and I want you to carry it deeper than your ears, deeper than your understanding, down into that place where the real knowing lives. The past is not a sentence handed down by a judge who has the final word over your existence. It is a chapter, and there is a profound, sacred, and urgent difference between the two. A sentence is a verdict. It is final. It is the closing of a door that was never meant to open again. When we treat our past as a sentence, we do the cruelest thing imaginable. We become our own jailers. We take the key, we lock the door from the inside, and we convince ourselves that we are only being realistic. We call it acceptance. We call it knowing our place. But, beloved, there is nothing humble about agreeing with a lie. There is nothing wise about letting a painful yesterday speak louder than a God who is still breathing life into your today. A chapter, now. A chapter is something else entirely. A chapter has weight, yes. It has darkness sometimes. It has moments that make the reader hold their breath, moments that seem too heavy to survive on the page. But a chapter turns, that is its very nature. It was always meant to give way to the next, and the next, and the one after that. No chapter, no matter how devastating its contents, was ever designed to be the whole of the book. And here is what I have come to know about the author of your life. He does not waste a single page, not the page where you fell, not the page where you were betrayed by someone you trusted with the tenderest parts of yourself. Not the page where the diagnosis came, where the door closed, where the dream dissolved. Not even the pages you are ashamed of, the ones you would tear out if you could, the ones you have tried to pretend were never written. God keeps every page, and in his hands what seemed like ruin becomes context. What seemed like ending becomes the turning point that makes the rest of the story make sense. But you must understand this. The chapter cannot turn if you will not lift your hand from it. There are people who have made a home in their worst memory. They have furnished it, decorated it, learned every crack in its walls. They return to it so often that it has begun to feel like the only real place, the only true thing. And every time someone offers them a future, they hold up the past like a shield, or perhaps more honestly, like an anchor, something heavy enough to keep them from having to risk the terrifying, beautiful act of moving forward. To let go of the past is not to pretend it did not happen. God is not asking you to perform amnesia. He is not asking you to smile over your scars or dress your wounds in language that makes other people comfortable. What he is asking, what grace has always been asking, is that you stop letting what was done to you write what comes next for you. That you stop handing the pen to your pain. That you remember. in the marrow of your bones that you are not the worst thing that ever happened to you. And you are not the worst thing you ever did. You are a life still being written. You are a story still unfolding. And the God who began this work in you has never, not once, abandoned an unfinished page. There is a particular kind of fear that visits a person in the quiet hours, in the space between sleeping and waking, when the noise of the day has finally stilled, and there is nothing left to distract you from the enormity of what you are facing. It is the fear that you are alone in it, that the path ahead is unlit and unmapped, and that whatever steps you take, you are taking them without any hand to steady you, without any voice to direct you, without any presence larger than your own small, trembling self to make sense of the wilderness you find yourself standing in. That fear is ancient, it is human, and it is, I want to tell you today with everything in me, the fear built entirely on a misunderstanding of who God is and how he moves. Because here is the truth that has taken root in me through every season of uncertainty. Every valley I was convinced had no exit. Every moment when I looked ahead and saw nothing but fog and distance, and the absence of any clear sign. God does not wait for you to figure it out before he begins to move. He does not sit at the edge of heaven, watching you stumble through confusion, arms folded, waiting for you to pray the right prayer, or find the right words, or finally reach a level of faith clean enough to deserve his intervention. That is not the nature of the divine. That is not the character of a God who knit you together before you had a single thought of your own, who knew your name before your mother drew breath to speak it. God's guidance is not reactive. It is not something that kicks into motion the moment you get desperate enough to ask. It was already in motion before you woke this morning. It was already in motion before the problem that is keeping you up at night ever announced itself. It was already in motion in the years before you were born, weaving together the people, the places, the seemingly accidental collisions of circumstance that would become the road beneath your feet. When you finally arrive at the moment that looks like a breakthrough, what you are really arriving at is the place where you can finally see what God has been building all along. This is the thing about divine guidance that our human minds struggle to hold. It does not always look like guidance while it is happening. It does not always arrive with clarity and comfort and a neatly lit path stretching out before you. Sometimes it looks like a closed door that you beat your hands against for months before you understood it was protecting you from something you could not see. Sometimes it looks like a delay that felt like abandonment, a silence that felt like absence, a detour that felt like punishment. But God is not punishing you when he redirects you. He is not ignoring you when he is quiet. He is working in the register that human eyes are not yet calibrated to read, moving pieces into position, clearing what needed to be cleared, strengthening in you what would have snapped under the weight of what is coming if you had arrived at it any sooner. I think of the way a river moves. You can stand at one bend and see only the curve, only the bank, only the narrow slice of water in front of you. And you might believe that the river ends just there, just beyond what your eyes can reach. But the river does not end. It keeps moving. It keeps finding its way around every rock, through every narrow passage, across every terrain that tries to stop it. And the water does not panic at the rock. It does not grieve the obstacle. It simply moves, because its nature is to move. Because something larger than the obstacle is pulling it forward. That is what God's guidance looks like in a life surrendered to it. Not the absence of rocks, not the absence of narrow places, but an unstoppable forward motion that no obstacle has the final authority to halt. You do not have to engineer your own deliverance. You do not have to exhaust yourself manufacturing outcomes or forcing doors or pretending to a certainty you do not feel. What you are being invited into is something far more restful and far more powerful than striving. It is the radical, countercultural, almost unreasonable act of trusting that the God who set the stars in their places has not lost track of where you are going, has not miscalculated what you need, has not for one single moment taken his hand off the story of your life. There is a story we have been told, quietly and persistently, by the world we grew up in. It is a story dressed in the language of strength, wrapped in the appearance of dignity, and it goes something like this: that to hold on is to be strong, and to let go is to surrender. That the person who carries their grief without flinching, who walks through fire without crying out, who keeps their wounds private and their jaw set and their eyes dry, is somehow more worthy of respect than the one who finally, blessedly, opens their hands and releases what has been destroying them from the inside. We have been so thoroughly taught this story that many of us have never stopped to question it. We have swallowed it whole, and it has settled in us like stone. And we have spent years, some of us decades, holding on to things that were never meant to be carried this far, because somewhere deep in the architecture of our understanding, we came to believe that letting go meant losing, and we were already tired of losing. But I want to stand before you today and tell you that this story is a lie. Not a small lie, not a harmless cultural misunderstanding, but a costly and life-stealing lie that has kept more people imprisoned in their own pain than any external force ever could. Because the truth that wisdom teaches, that grace confirms, that every person who has ever walked through genuine transformation will tell you, is that release is not the absence of strength. Release is strength arriving at its most mature and most honest expression. Think for a moment about what it actually costs to hold on. Think about the energy that is consumed, daily, hourly, sometimes minute by minute, in the maintenance of old anger. The way it lives in the body, tightening the shoulders, shallowing the breath, keeping the nervous system in a permanent state of readiness for a battle that ended years ago. Think about the mental real estate occupied by old shame, the way it crowds out possibility, the way it sits in the front row of every new opportunity and whispers reasons why you do not deserve it, why it will not work, why someone like you should not expect too much. Think about the grief that was never properly mourned, that was instead packed down and carried forward, surfacing at inconvenient moments, attaching itself to new relationships and new situations, contaminating the present with the unfinished business of the past. This is what holding on actually looks like beneath the surface. This is the true cost of what we have been calling strength. And yet we grip tighter. Because releasing means feeling. It means standing in the full reality of what happened, without the numbing comfort of anger to protect you, without the familiar armor of bitterness to hide behind. It means acknowledging the loss as a loss, the wound as a wound, the grief as grief, and trusting that you can survive the feeling of it without being destroyed by it. That is terrifying work. It is some of the most terrifying work a human being can undertake. And that is precisely why it requires not weakness, but a quality of courage that most people never find the bravery to practice. There is a wisdom that lives on the other side of release that cannot be accessed any other way. It is a wisdom that comes only to those who have put down what was heavy and discovered, to their astonishment, that they could still stand, that the ground was still there beneath their feet, that the God they trusted to catch them when they let go was exactly where he said he would be. This wisdom does not come from holding on. It comes from the terrifying, sacred, utterly transformative act of opening your hands in the presence of God and saying, I cannot carry this anymore, and I was never supposed to. Take it. Take what was done to me. Take what I did. Take the version of myself I have been clutching because I was afraid there was nothing else underneath. Take it all, and give me back what you intended for me from the beginning. Because what God gives back when you release, what rushes into the space that bitterness and shame and unforgiveness have been occupying, is not emptiness. It is not vulnerability without protection. What fills that space is something that no amount of holding on could ever have made room for. It is freedom. It is clarity. It is the breath you forgot you were not taking. It is the person you were always meant to become, waiting patiently just on the other side of the thing you would not put down. There are places in a life that mark you, not in the way that beautiful things mark you, not the way a sunrise marks you, or the way a child's laughter marks you, leaving something warm and luminous pressed into the memory like a flower between pages. I mean the other kind of marking. The kind that comes from the places where you were diminished, where you were broken open in ways you did not choose, where something was taken from you that you are not entirely sure you ever got back. Those places have a particular gravity to them. They pull at you. They speak in a voice that has learned over time to sound exactly like your own, and they say, "This is where you belong. This is what you are made of. This is the truest thing about you." And the cruelest part of it is how believable that voice becomes. Because the place was real. The pain was real. The thing that happened there, whatever it was, however it arrived, whoever delivered it, was not imagined, was not exaggerated, was not a weakness of perception. It happened. And when something real and painful happens in a real and specific place, the human heart has a tendency to fuse with that place, to make it the center of its geography, to organize everything else around it, the way a map organizes itself around a wound. But I need you to hear this today with every cell of your being, with every functioning part of your understanding. That place was not your destination. It was never your destination. Not the hospital room, not the courtroom, not the empty house after everyone had gone. Not the office where they told you your services were no longer needed. Not the relationship that ended in silence or in violence or in the slow, suffocating death of being made to feel invisible by someone who was supposed to see you. Not the addiction that swallowed years you cannot get back. Not the season of poverty that taught you shame before it taught you anything else. None of those places, no matter how long you lived in them, no matter how deeply they shaped you, were ever the place God intended as your permanent address. There is a difference, and it is a difference that can change everything when you truly understand it, between a place that forms you and a place that defines you. Every difficult place you have passed through has formed something in you. It has built a muscle you did not know you needed. It has carved a depth in your character that comfort alone could never have created. It has given you a language for suffering that will one day make you the only person in the room capable of reaching someone who is drowning in the same waters you once knew. That forming was not accidental. God is not wasteful, and he does not allow his children to pass through fire simply for the spectacle of it. There is always something being forged in the heat, even when you cannot feel anything but the burning. But forming is not the same as defining. The fire shapes the steel. It does not become the steel. The desert prepares the prophet. It does not become his home. The wilderness was a passage, not a residence. And this is the word I believe someone in this room needs to receive today. Not as a pleasantry, not as the kind of encouraging language we offer each other to fill the silence, but as a genuine and urgent truth. You have been treating a passage like a permanent home. You have been unpacking your bags in a place God only ever intended you to move through. The preparation was real. The lessons learned in that hard place were real. The person you became because of what you survived in that season is real and necessary and valuable beyond what you currently understand. But preparation is always pointing toward something. It is always in service of a destination that lies further along the road. God does not prepare people for the sake of preparation. He prepares people for purpose. He allows the forming so that what comes next has something solid to stand on, something tested and proven and refined enough to bear the weight of what he has been building toward all along. You were not broken in that place so that you could spend the rest of your life cataloging the damage. You were broken in that place so that God could show you and show the world through you what he is capable of rebuilding. The place that hurt you was never the headline of your life. It was always, only ever the context for your becoming. There is something that happens when you stand in the middle of what used to be your life and look around at what remains. When the structure you built with your own hands, with your own hope, with your own stubborn and beautiful belief that this time it would hold, when that structure comes down and you are standing in the rubble of it, the first thing that arrives is not grief. Grief comes later. When the shock has thinned enough to let feeling back through, the first thing that arrives is a silence so total, so disorienting, that it feels almost like a physical substance. The silence that asks the question your mouth is not yet ready to form. What do I do now? What is left? What can possibly be built from this? I have stood in that silence. I suspect you have too. And I want to talk today about what I have discovered lives inside it, what I have learned to recognize moving beneath the surface of the worst moments, doing its patient and invisible and utterly miraculous work, and that is grace. Not grace as a word we reach for when we have run out of more specific language. Not grace as a theological concept that lives comfortably in Sunday morning conversations and rarely survives contact with Monday's reality. I mean grace as an active force. Grace as something that moves through the ruins of a life with the quiet, purposeful intelligence of an architect who has already seen the finished structure and is simply, steadily, unhurriedly clearing the ground to build it. Because here is what I have come to understand about ruins. They are not the end of the story of a place. They are the beginning of a different kind of possibility. Every road that was ever built required that something be cleared first. Every foundation that ever held something magnificent required that the ground be broken, disrupted, turned over in ways that looked, from the outside, like pure destruction. The clearing is not the catastrophe. The clearing is the preparation. And what looks to our limited and grief-stricken eyes like devastation is often, in the economy of God, simply the necessary precondition for something that our imaginations, still anchored to what we lost, do not yet have the capacity to conceive. Grace does not look at your ruins and recoil. It does not assess the damage and calculate whether the situation is recoverable enough to be worth the effort. Grace does not operate on the logic of worthiness or probability or the reasonable expectation of return on investment. Grace operates on an entirely different principle, one that confounds every human system of accounting. It moves toward the broken thing. It is drawn to the place of greatest need the way water finds the lowest ground, not because the broken thing deserves it, not because the situation has earned it, but because that is the nature of the source from which it flows. God's grace is not rationed out to those whose ruins are small enough or recent enough or caused by circumstances sympathetic enough. It is poured out lavishly and without calculation into the very places that look most beyond repair. And what it does there, what grace does in the ruins of a life that has been genuinely surrendered to it, is something that no human strategy, no self-help methodology, no sheer act of personal will could ever replicate. It does not merely repair what was broken. It does not simply restore what was lost, returning you to the place you were before the collapse, as though the whole painful episode were simply a detour back to the original road. That would be mercy, and mercy is extraordinary. But grace is something beyond even that. Grace takes the ruins themselves, the actual broken pieces, the specific rubble of your specific collapse, and uses them as building material for something that could not have existed without them. The road that grace builds runs through the wreckage, not around it. It is made in part of what was destroyed. This is why the people who have been most broken, most emptied, most thoroughly stripped of every false support and every comfortable illusion are so often the ones who carry the most breathtaking testimonies. Not because suffering is good. Suffering is not good, and God is not a God who engineers your pain for the entertainment of heaven, but because grace is most visible where it has the most to work with. And ruins, beloved, give grace everything to work with. Every shattered piece is material. Every loss is a space that grace can fill with something that holds more weight than what it replaced. Every road that could not be built any other way is waiting to be laid across the very ground that your collapse prepared. We have been taught, most of us, to wait until we are ready. To wait until the fear has subsided enough to move without shaking, to wait until the picture is clear enough to proceed without doubt, to wait until we have gathered sufficient evidence that the risk is manageable, that the outcome is probable, that the ground ahead will hold our weight before we commit to stepping onto it. We have been taught that preparation precedes movement, that certainty is the responsible prerequisite to action, that the person who moves before they are fully ready is reckless, is naive, is setting themselves up for the particular humiliation of a public and avoidable failure. And so we wait, and the waiting, which began as wisdom, quietly becomes something else entirely. It becomes the most comfortable and most socially acceptable form of staying exactly where we are while telling ourselves and everyone around us that we are simply not yet ready to leave. But I want you to consider something today that has the power to dismantle that entire architecture of waiting, if you will let it. I want you to consider that God has never once in the entire history of human encounter asked anyone to move when they were ready. He did not ask Moses when Moses felt equipped. He did not ask Esther when Esther felt safe. He did not ask Peter when Peter felt confident enough to step out of the boat without the reasonable expectation of sinking. He asked them in the middle of their insufficiency, in the center of their fear, at the precise moment when every human calculation said that this was not the time, that they were not the person, that the conditions were not favorable, and the odds were not encouraging. And the sensible thing, the measured thing, the thing that a reasonable person would do, was to wait a little longer. And in every single case, the miracle did not precede the movement. The miracle was released by the movement. This is the architecture of divine partnership that we so persistently misunderstand. We keep waiting for God to make the path obvious before we take the first step, when the very nature of faith, the very thing that faith is and does and means, is that you take the step before the path is fully visible. Not blindly, not recklessly. Not without the internal knowing that comes from time spent in genuine communion with the God who is calling you forward, but without the complete picture, without the guarantee, without the certainty that every frightened part of you is demanding before it will agree to move. Because certainty is not the currency of the new journey. Courage is, and courage in its truest and most useful form is not the absence of fear. It is the decision made in the full presence of fear that something matters more than the fear does. And that decision, that single interior decision, does not have to be dramatic to be transformative. It does not have to arrive with fanfare or feeling, or the overwhelming emotional confirmation that we sometimes mistake for divine assurance. It can be quiet. It can be small. It can be a yes spoken in a whisper, in an ordinary moment that nobody else in the room even notices. A yes to getting up and trying again after the failure that convinced you that you were finished. A yes to forgiving the person your pride told you deserved nothing from you. A yes to the dream you buried so many years ago that you had almost forgotten you were the one who buried it. A yes to the possibility that God is not done with you, that the story is not over, that the silence you have been living in was not the silence of abandonment, but the silence of preparation. And that preparation has a conclusion, and the conclusion is movement. And the movement begins with you, because here is what the new journey requires at its very entrance. Not your perfection, not your wholeness, not your fully healed and fully resolved and fully prepared self arriving at the starting line with everything in order and nothing left undone. It requires only your willingness. It requires only the open hand, the turned face, the small and trembling and utterly sufficient act of saying yes to a God who has been waiting with a patience that surpasses all human understanding for exactly this moment, exactly this decision, exactly this version of you, uncertain and imperfect and finally blessedly ready to begin.